As a composer, I wonder, with albums and recital programs, very often you'll see a concert that's devoted purely to living composers or composers of a certain background. And what I actively try to do is to bring it all together to show actually how connected everyone is. And I think I'm trying to make a case for living composers that they should have the same place in our repertoire as the composers that came before.
When you decided to be a flute player, I wonder, what were the reasons in the beginning? How did you decide, okay, I want to be a flute player? Were there other extra musical factors that were involved, or was it like, no, I want to play flute?
That's a great question. I think for me, it was just I wanted to play the flute. I loved music. I still love music. And I don't come from a musical family. Lots of people who love music, but no one played instruments really. But I spent a lot of time watching PBS with my grandmother, and that was interesting because I got to watch shows about the world, so like kind of like National Geographic type shows. So in this way, I was able to envision going these different places that I only saw on the TV or in magazines. But then I also watched with her the live from Lincoln Center performances that I think still air on PBS. So this experience that I had with her played a big role, I would say, in me falling in love with music, but also with wanting to travel and to see the world.
So when you were starting to play the flute, like what were like the goalposts, I guess, on the way? Were you like taking lessons in the beginning, and then did you know you were gonna like play flute professionally? Because at least for me, being a composer, like I was nuts. Like from 8 years old, I was like, I want to be a professional composer, whatever the heck that means. You know, it's kind of neurotic.
And you did it.
I feel like I'm trying to do it every day. I don't feel like I ever did it, if that makes sense.
I totally understand that.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yep.
And I wonder if that you have the same feeling, or did you start it like young like me? Or
I wanted to play the flute. I didn't have a lot of hobbies when I was a kid. I mean, I liked books. I liked listening to music. And so when my cousins and, friends in the neighborhood wanted to play basketball and baseball and all sorts of things, I just wasn't interested in that at all. So when I came home and told my mom that I wanted to join the band and that I wanted to play the flute, I think she just kind of stopped for a second and just said, because there are no musicians.
In the family. Right. Same here.
Yeah, no musicians. But there was this kind of moment, I think, that she was then realizing that I was actually saying that I was interested in doing something, right? Okay. I did not have a hobby or something outside of school before that. And all the effort that she had put into trying to sign me up for Little League and for basketball and things like that, failed. So I think when I said, I want to play the flute, she thought about it and she said, okay, I'll sign the form, sure. I ended up joining the band in my public school music program in Dayton, Ohio. Now, an interesting story is that I actually tried to join the band a year before. The year prior, I was in the 4th grade, and they have these, I guess, informal auditions where it's basically you just meet with the band director, and they give you different instruments, and you try to see if you can make a sound.
Mm-hmm. I remember this too.
Right. Okay. I only wanted to play the flute, so there was really no need to try to give me other instruments to try, but I couldn't make a sound. And he was like, you can't do it. And so I was so disappointed that I walked to school for a whole year trying to figure out what kind of instruction he was giving me to make an embouchure to get a sound. And I went back the next year. I got a sound right away, and then Mom signed the form. So,
but isn't that, you know, I always wondered about this. Isn't it weird that we have to try a bunch of these instruments to decide which one fits you the most?
right.
Like that, does that make sense with anything else?
No.
It's not like we play, okay, go play basketball for 3 seconds. Okay, now play soccer for 3 seconds.
Yeah.
That's literally the amount of time I remember putting that trombone to my face. It's like, oh, no, not this one. Oh, no, not this one. I'm like, wait, whoa, it says who, you know?
Right.
I want to play that instrument. I want to, you know, not the other instrument.
Yeah.
So I'm like, every time I hear this similar story from different people, I'm like, I didn't realize it's done like this everywhere.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's really, really crazy. And to think that I'm at this stage in my adult and professional life and that I'm still practicing every day and trying to get better each day. It's a lifelong journey. So to give someone an instrument for 2 seconds and to like really let that determine whether or not they're going to be successful at it or whether they even have real potential, that's no way to really know.
Yeah, I mean, and who would have? And if you didn't play the flute, you probably wouldn't have played anything.
No, because
right?
I really
that's what
didn't
you
have an
wanted to do.
interest. You know, I think I loved music enough that if, you know, years down the line, maybe I could have picked up another instrument. But it's an interesting thing when what draws us to an instrument, right? And for some reason, there wasn't anything else that I was really drawn to. And so that's that.
No, I mean, I'm the same way. When I wanted to be a composer, I wasn't drawn to anything else in the music field. I didn't want to be a conductor. I don't want to be a musician.
Yeah.
I was just a composer. That's it. You know, and then it became even more focused. I don't want to do film music. I don't want to do commercial music. I just want to write concert music. And then it became even more.
Right.
And that's something we'll talk about with you. Then it became even more narrow. I'd rather write orchestral and chamber music if I could. And I don't really want to write. I don't want to be on the choral circuit or the wind band circuit. You know, I'm you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So it's like it gets like more narrow and narrow and narrow, and that makes me wonder too, is that the right thing I should be doing? Because I'm putting myself in a box the further I go in. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. I was just gonna ask you, I'm thinking back to that moment when I realized that I wanted to play the flute and that I was really drawn to music. Do you remember that moment when you felt like you were drawn to being a composer?
Yeah, I remember it like it was yesterday, even though I was 8.
8?
Yeah, but what was it for you?
I want to say it was around 10. No, actually, it was around 8 or 9 because I played for 2 years in the elementary school band, and I had tried a year prior to join and failed. So yeah, it was about 9 years old when I said, I think this is something that I want to do.
No, but you were 9. You were playing for a couple years before that.
No,
no,
I was 9 when I joined the band, and my mother rented a flute for me.
So you didn't touch the flute at all?
I did not touch the flute
Yeah.
at all. And then she generously went out with me to find a good instrument, and we rented one. You know, instruments are really expensive, and I was young, and who's to say that who knew I was still going to be interested in it 6 months down the line.
Right.
So, you know, he rented this instrument. My mother did this for me. And then I played in the band for 2 years. And that's an interesting thing in America. I know music education early on is very different. At least in America, it really historically has centered around band, which I think is really... It's cool because I think one thing that I'm drawn to about music is this shared experience of creating something with other people. But at the same time, I think it can be a bit challenging when one is starting out because you don't really get the one-on-one instruction that you really need, the foundation to learn how to play the instrument properly. And so that was hard to have done that for 2 years before actually going on to have serious lessons and things.
Yeah, I mean, I played clarinet in a band growing up, and I think I had one lesson.
One lesson, yeah.
The whole time, but I was good enough to play, or at least I thought I was good enough to play whatever repertoire was thrown at me.
Right.
But I never took it like seriously and went to the next level and took lessons because, again, like in the back of my mind, I said, I'm a composer, I'm not a musician, which was a weird thing to like tell people, you know, that I don't really care about playing this instrument because I write music. It kind of is kind of narcissistic when you think about it, actually, and that's something I say often, actually, too.
But I know very well the music that you write, and I don't think it would be possible for a composer to write that kind of incredible music without being a great musician, Saad.
Well, I can't. The thing is, I can't play. I can't even play a little half of that stuff I wrote for you on the piano. You know. That's the thing.
Okay. But truth be told, I hear this from a lot of composers.
Right. And I don't really talk to that many composers actually that are very proficient players. It's weird. A lot of them, including myself, are not proficient players at anything. Or some of them might say, "Oh, I'm proficient at the computer." Right? That's what they say a lot now, which I can understand. But
sure.
I still find it weird that we grew up in this environment where we're not really expected to play, because all the masters, you know, Beethoven and even Debussy and Stravinsky further down the line, they all were like really good keyboard players.
Yeah.
So it's strange to me. It's like you have this kind of, or at least I have this kind of imposter syndrome sometimes when I'm writing a big orchestral score. It's like I can't play any of this, even if there was a gun to my head, you know. And it kind of screws with your head a little bit, you know.
But how did this happen, and why do you think it happened? Because if historically speaking, there have been great composers who also were quite proficient at instruments and played their own music.
I think the patronage models changed, like with academia.
Got it.
Because if you're teaching most of the time, you know, you're not going to be practicing. You're not going to be going on tour. Mm-hmm. You're not going to need to have extra income to, like Debussy accompanied opera singers. Like that was his gig, right? So, you know, he would need to keep up his piano chops. But if you're in the university and you're teaching, you know, 9 to 5,
yep.
Where is the need to keep up your chops?
Right.
If that's not your primary thing becomes, okay, I gotta learn how to teach these kids counterpoint. Mm-hmm. You know, I gotta attend their recitals. I have to write my own music, and then slowly it becomes, okay, how do I get that professor job?
Yeah.
Oh, well, being a keyboard player or flute player or whatever is not one of those requirements anymore. Actually, when you go and look at a job posting for a composition job, nowhere in it does it say that you need to be proficient at an instrument. I haven't seen one gig like that where that was one of the job requirements. It's very interesting. So I think the patronage model in this country, I don't know if it's like this overseas in Europe or elsewhere, but in the US, it's not something that's high on the list of job requirements to be a composition professor. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where it comes from. I could be wrong. I don't know.
Got it.
But that affected me. For sure, because after I was like 16 years old, I definitely a huge drop off in playing the piano because, you know, going to university, studying and taking all these classes and such. Yep. You know, and I didn't play with anybody either. There was no room for it. So fast forward now, I'm 30 years old. You know, I can't even like play like a basic Bach invention on the keyboard without like practicing all day, you know, or maybe all week.
That's also Bach for you, but
yeah. But not even just getting through the notes and the rhythm. So that sticks with me, no matter how hard I try to fend it off. That imposter syndrome, because I had Timo Andrus sitting there, and that show will come out. I don't know if it will come out before yours or after, but you know, do you know him, Timo Andrus? Yeah, he was sitting right there before, but. Yeah. He's an extremely prolific piano player.
Yes, and we're gonna play together.
Oh yeah,
next season. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, but it's like, you know, when you have someone like that across from you that could really play, it just makes you feel certain things that you can't help. You know.
Sure.
So Although I don't think I told him that.
Oh,
Yeah. But with you, playing the flute, going through schooling, obviously you went to college for flute. You went to Oberlin.
right.
It's interesting, at Oberlin, they have a very intense composition program over there too. Did you have Stephen Harkey over there yet?
No,
Yeah.
not yet. When I was there, it's a wonderful place to be, and I honestly think going to Oberlin opened my mind up to contemporary music and really sparked an interest in me to want to commission new works and to work with composers. I'll never forget, it was my freshman year. I couldn't have been on campus more than a month or two at this point. And there was a lovely composer on my floor in the dormitory where I lived. And he heard me practicing once, and he said, "Hey, I want to write a piece for flute. And do you think you play it on the composition recital?" And I said, "That sounds like really cool." It's like, I mean, at this point, I was 18 years old. I had not really met a composer. All the composers that I had played, dead, were long dead,
Yeah.
honestly. And I did meet John Corgliano. Did visit my high school once when
Really?
he was in town. Yes, he was in town because the orchestra was playing a piece of his, and so he came to visit my high school, which was a performing arts high school. But
Okay,
that
wow.
was the one composer that I had, living composer that I had met. And so then I show up at college and there are composers on my floor in the dorm. They're like, "We want to write music and will you play it?" I'm like, "Sure." So here I am a few months later playing on these composition recitals, and I loved it. I thought it was so exciting because what they were writing was so interesting, and they were asking me questions about the flute and what works and what doesn't, and what kinds of things do I like, what kinds of things would I not like in a piece. And it just really felt collaborative, and it felt like I had an opportunity to be part of creating something new. And I just loved it. And so every chance I got, I tried to work with composers. And by my senior year, I was playing with the Contemporary Music Ensemble as my large ensemble experience. So after 3 years of orchestra, my last year ensemble playing was devoted to the Contemporary Music Ensemble, and working with people like Helmut Lachenmann. These guys is just really special for me.
And Helmut Lachenmann came also to Oberlin. Wow.
I still have the program that he signed for me. Yes, after we played his music.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And before we get too into a lot of contemporary music, I want to share a couple minutes of this piece by Takemitsu that you played called Air, which is going to be featured on this album that's coming out called TWOFOLD. So
Yep.
let's hear a couple minutes of this. Well, that's amazing that Helmut Lachenmann come.
Yes.
You know, we had at Columbia, where I was a doctorate student, we actually had Helmut Lachenmann on Zoom he did like a unofficial seminar kind of thing with our teacher, Jörg Friedrich Haas. And he's the only composer I've ever seen my teacher, Haas, like talk about with like extreme reverence, as if he was like a living Beethoven. I've never seen him talk about a living composer or like a recent composer with such reverence as he does about Lachenmann.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. I didn't even know that he comes to the U.S.
I mean, I don't know how much he comes to the U.S. now. This was well over 10 years ago now. But it was a really, really special experience. And, that school really ignited a fire in me for all things new and being part of the creation and performance of new work.
So after going to Oberlin, where did you end up after that?
I came to New York and I was at Manhattan School for a master's in the classical department. So in Manhattan School, there are many different departments where you can be in the contemporary performance, you can be in the orchestral performance, you can be in the classical. And for me, it just made sense to apply for the classical program because I loved, and I still, of course, do love contemporary music, but I wanted an experience that allowed me to play everything.
Yeah.
And I loved orchestra too. So I just wanted a program that would give me sort of a well-rounded experience. I always thought later on if I wanted to focus on any one thing later, sure. But at least while getting an education, I thought it was, and my previous teachers also thought it was very important for it to be as broad as possible.
Yeah, no, it makes sense because I know at MSM they have a very robust contemporary music program.
Yes.
But from what I just had a concert with them a few months ago, and like all the players, it was wild. Like all they do is new music, which is great. But then it kind of puts you in that box early on in your education, which I mean some people want, but it didn't sound like that you were.
No,
there. I don't think your career now is like that either.
No.
It's not just new music.
No,
which is
not.
very cool.
No, it's not. And after I graduated, I did a lot of freelance work as an orchestral player. And I flew all over the country playing with different orchestras. And so I think having that education that it wasn't just contemporary music allowed me a lot of opportunities, realistically, just for work, because I could go sit in an orchestra and play the different roles if need be. I also, did a lot of contemporary music too, but yeah, I think having a broad education really does lend itself to many more possibilities career-wise for people.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that when outside people look at a performer or a composer, that they usually just define that person with like a sentence or two sentences, but right. I know that when I talk to people, especially in this format, because we get to learn a lot about a person, in one shot. Yep. Whereas if we're just kind of talking at wherever, it's just more drawn out, just because well, I'm not prying you about your life in a setting other than this. And people are more complicated than just one thing that they do. Yes. Like with me at least, people see me. I write music from the middle. I use Middle Eastern influence, and that's it. But then when you look at the music that I'm doing, it gets way more intense than that. Than just that super. And it's the same thing with the career in flute. Like people think, okay, that it means one thing, but it doesn't.
Right.
Before we get into the weeds with anything, I want to talk about the album.
Sure.
Because that's coming out. I think by the time this show comes out, the album would have been out a couple of days. So I'm going to put we're going to see the album right here somewhere in the middle here. Yeah. And really exciting because the album is called TWOFOLD, right?
Called TWOFOLD. What
I didn't know about this was that the inception of the album was something that came from me, which I was shocked about because we didn't know each other before you played my piece. So I want to know a little bit more about how that all happened. And how you chose all the different pieces on this album, and then we're going to play a couple excerpts.
Yeah, well, I owe you a lot because your composition did influence the concept behind the album. During lockdown in 2020, lots of us musicians, we tried to find ways to stay engaged and to keep practicing and projects and things like that. And so I did spend a lot of time over the period of a year playing unaccompanied stuff, practicing it, recording it, this and that. And sometime around 2021, I want to say it was, or was it 2021? When I discovered that you had written a piece based on the C.P. Bach unaccompanied sonata.
Yeah, I think it was end of 2021, 2022. Yeah, somewhere around that time, yeah.
And I was so fascinated by this. I mean, of course, I'm a huge fan of your writing, and I think what you are able to do as a composer and what you are able to say through the music that you write is so special. And when you sent me the score, I said, oh wow, this is so great. And I had already planned on recording a series of unaccompanied works, but I really didn't know what direction the album could go in. And I always like to have some kind of, it doesn't have to have necessarily like a story, but just some kind of connection between the pieces and maybe even the composers and their stories. And so I realized with the C.P. Bach and then pairing your work, that was an amazing, amazing pairing, because you literally based it on the first movement. And it got me thinking more about composers through the ages, their inspiration, and perhaps how composers today also connect with composers from the past. And so I said, why not create a series of pairings? So we had that pairing, and I said, well, who else would I want to feature on this album? And so thinking about the influences outside of Western classical music that you bring to your composing, I was immediately reminded of Reena Esmail, who is a friend of Imani Winds, and we've commissioned her to write a gorgeous wind quintet, and she has a series of other works, solo and chamber. And I said, wow, maybe I'll put her on the album too. And I said, well, composers who trained in the Western classical tradition, but also bringing in sounds from the East. And I said, well, you have to have Takemitsu. It cannot.
So that was the pairing.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and then I said, well, we have Takemitsu, but then Takemitsu also, like, the harmonies in the sound world, like, very, like, influence French and, Impressionist, particularly Air, his one of his final works. And I said, wow, well, I have to play Debussy because we have Syrinx. Like, there we go, we have that. And I also, during 2020 and 2021, had been living with this piece, this small work, Diaphonic Suite by Ruth Crawford Seeger. And I adore her music. And in Imani Winds, we play her wind quintet often. For people who don't know her, she was an incredible composer whose life was cut short, unfortunately, due to cancer. And even before that, her composition career sort of took the backseat to family life, as it did for many women composers for centuries. She also became very well known for her work with her husband and their work with the Smithsonian documenting American folk music. So that is where her career kind of took her. But she traveled all over, Guggenheim Fellow, born in the Midwest, fellow Ohioan like myself, but spent time in Chicago. And I started thinking about her style of writing and the suite. And it's a very unique style that she called verse form, where each little phrase is almost like a verse, some shorter, some longer. And interesting enough, Sean Okpepolo who is a fabulous composer based in Chicago, wrote a great work for solo flute that is an imaginary dialogue between a young boy and his grandfather that was inspired by a painting. And I said, so these two composers, one living in the early 20th century, another one who's there now, working, writing, both sort of influenced by this sort of conversational-like style of composing and bringing speech patterns into music. I said, well, we'll have to pair those two together. And just before I knew it, I had a whole album of pairings, and it all started because of your wonderful composition.
Well, that's crazy. And what I noticed is that my pairing at least, is the pairing I came up with, right? Because that's how I wrote the piece. But the other pairings are pairings you came up with.
Yes.
So it kind of all stemmed from that, but then you used it's your creativity to come up with those, and your experiences that came up with the other pairings, which is really kind of wild. I was shocked because I actually didn't know until I heard your like soft premiere or whatever you want to call it of the piece at Lincoln Center. That was the first time I realized that that's what happened. So it was a shock to me. I showed my wife. I said, "Is this true? I don't know, because I never heard you talk about it with me." So I was
full
really
of surprises. I'm full of surprises.
But let's hear the first. We'll hear my piece later, but I want to show the Esmail piece, the Zinfandel. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Zinfandel, okay.
Yeah.
I want to play the last couple minutes of this because it's interesting. With Reena and I, we're on programs quite often. I think we're on another program at Lincoln Center too in November. We get paired a lot, so it's interesting to me how, not on purpose, just on accident, we kind of get paired a lot. So I want to play a couple minutes of this great performance of this piece, the last couple of minutes. Here we go. No, Reena is an interesting composer to me because, like me, she's been on this like really intense journey of like figuring out who she is. Because, as someone that is trained in the West, but really fascinated by their ancestry, but like they can never really be, totally entrenched in their ancestry, right? Because they grew up here. There's only so much that you could take from that world, at least with her, with the Hindustani influence. I really connect with that because I feel the same way. It's like, as much as I try to connect, there's like, I'm never going to get there. And I think I don't know if my music shows that, but that's basically what I hope to do. It's like, it's a constant adventure. Every piece is like, okay, how close can I get to it? But then, okay, I got close, but then how far can I get away from it?
Sure.
And I think that's the interesting part about making music with those ancestral elements. It's not just trying to mimic it, but how do I make a spectrum between that and the Western music that I grew up with? Because I can't just like ignore the fact that I grew up in the West, right?
Right.
So I connect a lot with Reena because I hear that in her music, and I hear the evolution.
Sure.
Because this piece was written, I think, 2010.
Yes.
But, you know, in the last 10 years, I know a lot of her other music, and I can hear a lot of the evolution of it.
Yes. You know, Reena said that Zinfandel was one of the first pieces in which she started exploring this, incorporating the rags that are the scales in Hindustani music into her own compositions. And it sort of marks the beginning of that journey for her, which is really special to have it on this album. But I wanted to ask you, as a composer, as someone who is actively bringing in your ancestry, your personal history, and your just interest in other kinds of music outside of your Western classical training. When did that begin for you as a composer? Has it been there since the very beginning when you started writing and said, I want to write in this way? Or was there a point in time when you said, I want to explore this in another way?
I think for me, like you, you know, you wanted to play flute, right? You didn't say, I want to play this piece, or I want to do that, right? Or I want to be a new music flutist, or I want to be an orchestral flutist, right? You didn't have those thoughts. I was the same way. I didn't have thoughts of, I want to write music like this.
Sure.
So I just want to write music, whatever the heck that means. And for me, even at that time, I always thought it was like commercial music. At that time, when I was young, because I didn't even know there was such a thing as concert music.
Okay.
It wasn't until I was probably at USC. So I was like, not the beginning, maybe when I was a sophomore or junior, like 19, 20 years old. So that's like 12 years of composing that I've been doing. Then I realized I was watching these VHS tapes of like my family when I was like 20 years back from that time. So I was a baby, and like all my aunts and uncles and stuff are like my age in the videos. So it was really cool. But like everyone's speaking in Arabic. There's like Arabic music everywhere. A lot more then than it is now, of course, because people have been in this country. They become Americanized and that kind of thing. And, you know, the kind of Spanglish thing in the language, but in Arabic, that's happening a lot, right? So I could see like the very kind of, I can see the culture way stronger on these VHS tapes. So I thought it was really interesting. So I made a piece about it, a piece called Mai, which means water in Arabic, and for string quartet and electronics. And I used the recordings from these VHS tapes in this piece. And the whole reason I was doing this at all was because my mom wanted me to put the VHS tapes on the computer hard drive so that they don't get, I don't know if you've seen, like if you've ever had, do you have like VHS tapes of old?
I still have VHS tapes.
Home videos and stuff?
Yeah, sure.
Have you digitized them yet?
No.
See, they're probably in a bad shape.
And I think my mom still has like a lot of them too. And we never digitized it.
Yeah, you should look into it, because when I got a hold of them, they were already kind of in poor shape.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I don't know because they get bad, these tapes. So it was because of that I wrote that piece, and then I started researching about the maqam, the Arabic musical framework.
Yep.
Very rudimentary stuff. I didn't have a teacher or anything. And then I just got hooked, and I haven't stopped. So like the flute piece I wrote for you is like one of the latest iterations of that kind of initial spark. It was never something I intended to do.
Got it.
And actually, I'm happy that's how it happened. It was like by accident.
Yeah.
Because if you kind of force it, you know, it becomes tough to compose.
Sure.
If it doesn't really mean what you say it means, and you can kind of tell in the music too.
Yeah, I think what it sounds like you're alluding to is sort of like this coming from a place of authenticity.
Right.
It's just like really authentic how you came across this, and sort of like the evolution and sort of how you just figured out how you can incorporate this and then the study of it all. I think that as a performer, and I think about this a lot, that whatever I do, however I play, or whatever I put out into the world, an album, whatever, I think people will, I hope, receive it well if I'm coming from a place that's very authentic, and that is really reflecting who I am, how I think about music, who I am as a person. I think that's so important, and I think it's really powerful that what composers are able to do, because I think whether or not you all realize it, what you're doing by creating these very, very incredible sound worlds for us to live in and to explore, you're also giving us an invitation to explore who we are and to bring that in into our performances. And I think that that's just like really special.
And I like the way that I didn't know this till now, I guess, the trajectory of how you chose the pieces on the album, because it's not like sometimes you get kind of cynical, at least me, when programs are being decided, because you can kind of tell, they kind of want that token, maybe Asian person, that token Hispanic person, that token Black person, that token. Rarely actually is it a token Middle Eastern person, I have to say. But that's a point for another discussion. But I like the way you described how you came up with the trajectory, because you started from these pieces that you love.
Yeah.
Right? The Takemitsu Air, the Debussy, the Ruth Crawford Seeger. Yeah. You started from there and found connections, rather than the other way around. I want a Black person. I want an Arab person. I want an Indian person.
No.
It almost doesn't even matter actually who you had in that way, because you came up with the connections from the beginning, which I haven't actually thought of in that way. It kind of happened by accident with me with the CP Bach, just because I just happened to hear it on YouTube. I think what happened with that piece, I'm kind of jumping everywhere now, but it is what it is. Sorry. But one of my other flute friends showed me the CP Bach, actually, the person I wrote it for, Dustin White, this player from upstate New York, and he showed me the CP Bach, and immediately it was like, that's it, that's the piece.
Yeah.
So those kind of things can just happen. There's not much preparation for it. It just kind of happens.
Yeah. I think time is important. We need time to process things, to discover new things. And for me, having lived with a couple of these pieces for many, many years, I think over the years, I've discovered new pieces and new composers and new voices that really interest me. And I thought, how special would it be to just put them all together in a very special project like this. But I have a question for you.
Now you're asking me more questions than I'm asking you.
Okay.
I don't like this. Go
okay,
ahead.
I can stop.
Go ahead. No, I'm just kidding.
No. See, now you made me forget what I was going to ask. My question is, as a composer, you asked this sort of question earlier about identity and being labeled sort of a new music person, or labeled this, labeled as a performer. As a composer, I wonder, with albums and recital programs, very often you'll see a concert that's devoted purely to living composers or composers of a certain background, right? And what I actively try to do is to bring, everyone can see in this album, is to bring it all together to show actually how connected everyone is. And I think I'm trying to make a case for living composers that they should have the same place in our repertoire and in our programs as the composers that came before. And How do you feel about when you see your name on a program that's devoted to only certain types of composers versus like it's a program and you have Bach and you have Debussy?
Well, I mean, there's certain ways. I mean, I agree. By the way, I much prefer to have my music shared with Beethoven or Bach or Takemitsu or Stravinsky or whoever. I much prefer that. But as a composer, you can't knock when your music is being performed with a bunch of other living composers, or even on a program that has a theme that is tied with your identity, which both have happened with my music. So you kind of have to tread carefully as a composer, because you want, the name of the game is you want your music to be played, of course, as often as possible, of course, because that's how we make our income. That's how we with the royalties and such, or sheet music sales. And that's also just how more people are aware of your music. And you don't want to tell someone else how to program your music, because that's never. But at the same time, if I had a choice, I much rather have my music performed alongside like a composer that's from the past that I admire. Sure. Much more so, because this is the way I think about music myself. And to be on a program with mostly living composers, for practical reasons, it puts a lot of strain actually on the ensemble. Usually it's the same ensemble, right, playing the whole program. Sure. So like, I'll give you an example. Like, I'm going to the Netherlands. Actually, when this thing is posted, I'll be in the Netherlands at the Gdamis Festival, and there's a bunch of ensembles playing my music, which is great. But at the same time, they're also playing a lot of other music by living composers on the same programs, which means that they're just consuming so much new stuff at one time. Yep. How is it possible that it's going to be all at a high level? You know, it's hard. But if you have a piece like Takemitsu that you know, right, you're not like relearning it from scratch. So you have a time to learn the new pieces. Sure. It's just practical. So for me, it's a little bit of the practical side, and then also like the philosophical side, that yes, like what you were saying, that these things should be connected, because that's how composers are thinking. They're either thinking that they're connected, or they're thinking they're doing a reaction against it. It's one of those two things. No matter what anybody tells you, those are the only two parameters that are going on when we're composing. Yep. So that's my rant. No, thank you. And it's a question I've been meaning to ask composers for a long time, and I've just never done it. So thank you for indulging me. Well, I don't know how many people agree with what I said. I just wanted an opinion, but I respect yours. That's my opinion. Yeah. I'm not gonna knock someone if they want to play my stuff, right? Right. But I'm not gonna. I know what's going on behind the scenes. Yep. If my piece is getting played, and there's 5 other pieces that are also brand new, I'm not going to pretend that my piece is going to get the amount of attention I think that it should need. Sure. Right? So that being said, let's play flute. I wanted to play selfishly, I guess, a couple minutes of the piece that you played of mine, called Tasalsul 1. This, by the way, is the first set of pieces that I'm writing for unaccompanied instruments. So I wrote 4 of these already, actually, but the flute one was the first one, and it's modeled after the Barrio Sequenze. So there's bits of the Barrio in all these pieces. So enough talking for me. Let's hear a couple minutes of it. I don't know how many albums have you had out so far?
This will be my second one.
Your second, so you've done it
solo.
before.
Yeah.
What makes you go through that process? Because I'm scared as hell to go through an album process. Because now you've just finished it twice, so it's not like you did the first one. I'm like, okay, I'm never doing this again. You wanted to dive in again.
I think it had a lot to about what I wanted to say. I think it gives me an opportunity to say something and to speak musically to people. I think I realized that this collection of pieces and this collection of very special composers needed to exist in one place. And I wanted to do that. Recording an album is a huge endeavor, very time consuming, very difficult. You know, I did it at a time where I had lived with most of these pieces for a long time. And I had made up my mind about how I felt about them interpretation-wise. And I wanted to put out an album that really reflects who I am. I don't want to say that my first album did not do that, but I have to say, and perhaps maybe I was being a little conservative because it was my first one and I didn't know how it was going to be received, and I was just in a very different place career-wise. But I felt like with this album, I could fully say what I wanted to say with the composers whom I love, and it was just that simple.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, I'm just scared to death myself to do it because of all the practical things. I remember you writing to me, we were doing the recording, but we don't have the edits till later on and things like this. It kind of scares someone, I think, and the fact that you went ahead and did it shows that you have faith in that that format too, the album format, which is something that we as classical musicians, it's not a format I think that is privy, I guess, to classical music, concert music, right? Because that's not the album itself. It's something that it's more from popular music, right? The way that it's consumed. But you found a way to do it, I think, because something I don't think that's been mentioned is that all these pieces are quite short. They're like in the 4, and I'm sure that was on purpose, the 4 or 5 minute range, which is like a popular album, popular music album. It's the same kind of concept. You don't have these 15-minute movements on the album, which I think works quite well.
It was something I thought about too, and I said, well, this seems very. It kind of went against the very classical music side of my brain, but as you said, this type of album is that's normal for pop music to have a 3-minute track here, a 4-minute track here, a 2-minute track, I don't know. And it just allows for a lot more variety. I do want to say, you are right, it is stressful, it is difficult, but I feel so lucky because I have such good people around me who are better at certain things than I am.
Right.
And I think a big part of being a musician, a big part of it is not just being, practicing and living in your own world about your art, but it's really surrounding yourself with people who you respect and who have skills that you don't. I did not know a lot about recording in the recording industry, but I have some wonderful friends who know a lot and were so generous with their time, who helped me and talked me through things. So I think that really helped. Having a producer who you trust and respect their ears. Graham Parker, who produced this album, it has, I think, one of the best set of ears ever, and is someone that I've respected for so long. So to have him on the other side in the booth was so helpful. Having people who you can just talk through ideas with and brainstorm, and then surrounding yourself with composers, I don't know, living or dead, right? In my life, I try to surround myself with people who make me a better person and help me grow. And so I think by having your music and now I think calling you a friend now enriches my life and my playing. And so I can't stress enough, we can never we should always surround ourselves with people who inspire us and motivate us to be better, because then tackling difficult projects like recordings and things like that, it's easier.
I mean, I can't follow that. I can't follow that. I agree with all that, and it's beautiful to hear that, because as a composer, sometimes it's, well, as anybody really, it's hard to ask for help, and I think that's an important note to end on. How can people get the album? What's the best way?
The best way to support music and to support musicians is to buy the music. So you can do that by visiting brandonpatrickgeorge.bandcamp.com to pre-order there. You can also, for those who prefer the streaming platforms, on September 15th, it will be available on all of the streaming platforms.
Awesome. So I'll put all those links in the description below. And thanks again, man, for coming. This is great.
Thank you. So much fun.
All right, that's it. Want to do that? Yeah, there you go.
All right. That's good.
Yeah, so I try to get all the different people to sign this thing, and hopefully by the end of it, I'll have all these filled up and then put new ones up.
What's today's date?
I think the 22nd,
8/20. All right.
8/22.
8/22. 23.
There we go. So there it is for everybody to. No, don't take it, but yeah, there you go. All right, thank you.